Oi, what's happening, everybody? Once again, it's about that time. Balls Deep Breakdown, UFC Vegas 29. We got Julian Erosa versus Seung-Woo Choi. We got Smooth Jimmy on the screen there with his lock of the week. That's my spirit animal right there. Let's get into the stats. Let's figure out who we like in this fight. A striker versus striker battle. I am very excited for. You guys probably know about both of these fighters by now. Julian Erosa, in my opinion, has really never even been in a boring fight in the UFC. He is a striker first. He's got some wrestling. He's got some submissions. He has a submission victory against Sean Woodson. And then we got Seung-Woo Choi, who is a Korean Muay Thai champion. Great striker, young, long, hits hard. And both of these guys are action fighters. So this is one of the ones that kind of stuck out to me that I should try to break down for you guys. See if we can find some angles. See if we can find some ways to make some money on this fight. This is kind of a strange card. You know, we got a lot of guys that are coming off some long layoffs. We got some young fighters. We got some. I'm not probably going to lay a lot of money on this card because there's a lot of unknowns with a lot of these fighters. However, this is one of the fights on the card that I'm actually excited for because we've seen quite a bit of Erosa. He's been busy. We've seen quite a bit of Choi. He's been busy. And we have enough data off of both of these guys to go off to, maybe try to find some advantages one way or another. So let's get into it. Let's start with the tail of the tape like we always do. We got Erosa, 31 years old. Seung-Woo Choi, 28. Erosa is a 6'1" featherweight, very, very big for the division. However, he's really not going to have a size advantage over Seung-Woo Choi. They got Choi listed at 6 feet. I wouldn't be surprised if Choi was actually taller than Erosa. They're both really big for the division. Choi a little bit thicker, Erosa a little bit skinnier. However, they're both big featherweights. Southpaw stance for Erosa. We got an orthodox fighter in Seung-Woo Choi. Erosa training out of Yakima MMA, while we got the MOB training center for Seung-Woo Choi, and we see the country right there. Now, let's get into the pro experience. We have got 33 professional fights for Erosa, while we only have 12 for Choi. 25-8 record for Julian. We got a 9-3 record for Seung-Woo Choi, and we see almost 3 times as many minutes in the cage for Julian Erosa. The average fight time right about the same at a little over 10 minutes, and we've got a almost 6-year career for Seung-Woo Choi, and we've got almost an 11-year career for Julian Erosa. So obviously Julian Erosa, the far more experienced fighter, probably the busier fighter too, at only 31 years of age to have 33 professional fights in an almost 11-year career. He's probably been fighting since the age of 20. And in those 13 years, he's put together 33 fights. So this is a guy who stays busy, stays active, doesn't take long layoffs, and that's something that we like. We can kind of get a feel for how they're fighting, for how consistent they're being when they're in the cage twice a year or 3 times a year, every single year. And that's something we get with actually both of these guys, is they've both been pretty active. We like that. As far as the UFC experience goes, we got twice as many fights for Julian Erosa with 8 fights as compared to 4 for Choi. They both have a 500 record. The cage time is actually similar, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Choi's only got 4 fights and about 60 minutes of cage time, while Julian Erosa only 68 minutes of cage time in 8 fights, and we can see that in the average fight time. The average fight time for the UFC, 8.5 minutes for Julian Erosa, while it's about 14.5 minutes for Choi. Choi's been finished once by submission. That was by Gavin Tucker. And Julian Erosa has had a lot of finishes in the UFC, whether they're wins or losses. This guy does not see the scorecards very often, and we'll go over that right now. So let's look at the overall finish statistics. 25 wins for Julian Erosa. We got 44% of those wins coming by TKO, and we got 44% coming by sub. He is an equal opportunity finisher, while we see on the Choi side, 56% by knockout, 0 by sub. So Seung-Woo Choi is very clearly a striker first. He is a Muay Thai specialist, a national champion in South Korea. The guy strikes long. He's got good straight punches that come right down the pipe, while with Erosa, we see some good kicks that help him maintain that distance. But for a 6'1" featherweight, Julian Erosa is not a guy that uses that height well, in my opinion. He throws a lot of hooks. He doesn't use the front kicks as much as he should in order to maintain distance against smaller fighters, and I think that's been part of his problem. I mean, if we look, we'll get into it a little bit more when we get into the last 5, but Erosa's been knocked down by shorter guys because he just lets them get inside. He's not afraid to brawl. He's not afraid to throw down, and we can definitely see that if we just look at his number of UFC fights, 8 of them, and we see that in the UFC, he's finished 75% of his wins, so 3 of his 4 wins coming by finish, and 3 of his 4 losses coming by finish as well. So 6 out of his 8 fights have not seen the scorecards. He's an in-your-face fighter. He goes out there, he tries to finish. Sometimes when he's unsuccessful doing that, he gets finished himself. But that's part of the reason that Erosa's fights have been so exciting, and why he's still fighting in the UFC despite the fact that he's about a 500 fighter. It's that, man, this guy throws down. He's exciting to watch, and I don't think that this fight's going to be any different. If we look at the losses, 75%, like we just mentioned, for Erosa, all by KO. So 3 out of his 4 losses in the UFC has been knocked out. While Seung-Woo Choi's losses, 2 of his 4 losses, it shows him by sub. However, I don't think he lost to Movsar by sub. That was a unanimous decision. So my stats are actually wrong. 25% of Seung-Woo Choi's losses have come by, oh no, it is. He's only lost 2 fights, so it is a 50% sub rate. My apologies, everybody. I'm not even high yet, so that's not even good when I do that. So 33% of the overall losses by sub for Choi, 33% by KO, and we've got a 50% KO loss by Julian Erosa overall. So let's get into the striking statistics here, because let's hope that this is a striking match, because if it isn't, it won't be as exciting, because neither one of these guys are grapplers first. But we see here Julian Erosa very busy as a striker. 5.07 significant strikes landed per minute out of 10.75 for a 47% striking accuracy. We've got Seung-Woo Choi here landing much less at 3.17 out of 7.72 attempted for a 41% striking accuracy. If we look at the power numbers here, we see that we have an almost identical knockdown per significant strike landed ratio for these guys. So they're showing about the same amount of power in the UFC, in terms of Choi having 0.5% and Julian Erosa about a 0.6% here, and Erosa averaging 0.44 knockdowns per 15 minutes, while Choi it's about 0.26. If we look at the striking numbers here, we see that Julian Erosa's opponents have landed more strikes than him and have attempted more strikes than him, as they're landing 5.72 out of 11.53 for a 50% striking defense for Erosa. Not stellar. And then if we look at Choi, we see he's receiving 2.45 strikes per minute out of 4.56 for a 46% striking defense, so even worse. Not a very good striking defense. However, Choi's fights have spent a lot of time in control time, and we'll go over that when we get into the grappling stats. So perhaps the reason the striking defense is so low is because a lot of these strikes that are landing against him are ground strikes, and they land with a higher percentage. And we get into the grappling stats right here, and we've got Julian Erosa, 6 takedowns out of 11 attempted in the UFC for a 54% takedown percentage, pretty good, while Choi is 4 out of 7 in his 4 fights for a 57% takedown accuracy. We got 1.03 takedowns per 15 minutes for Choi, 1.32 for Erosa, and then we've got 0.88 sub-attempts for 15 minutes to none for Choi. And we see the control time here for both of these guys. They're getting controlled about twice as much as they're controlling their opponent. So Erosa, 11.45% control time, allowing 22.43, while we see Choi controlling his opponents almost 20% of the time, but being controlled almost 40% of the time. So when we add up these two numbers for Choi, we're going to see something that we don't see very often, and that is in almost 60% of Seung-Woo Choi's fights are taking place either on the cage or on the floor. That's very disadvantageous for a guy who likes to strike first. And if we go into the advanced stats here, we can kind of take a look at both of these fighters, take a look at what they've done thus far. But I want to start with Choi here, and I want to point out a couple of things. So these are 4 opponents of Seung-Woo Choi. He started off against Movsar Evloev, who is still undefeated in the UFC, and as a matter of fact, his record is now up to 5-0. Gavin Tucker, 4-2 in the UFC. We got Suman Mokhtarian, 0-2, and Yusuf Zalal is 3-2. Okay, let's look at the defensive numbers for Choi. While we were talking about how 60% of his fights are taking place in control time, these are the defensive stats that I'm scrolling over to right here. So I'm on the Evloev fight right now, and we see that Evloev was 50 of 78 striking. In the second fight, 37 of 62 his opponent was, well over 50%. And both of these fights had a lot of takedowns and a lot of takedown attempts. And then you see, the striking percentages go down a little bit more as these guys attempt less takedowns and spend less time in control time. But in the first fight, Evloev, 5 of 16 takedowns. In the second fight that Seung-Woo Choi, his opponent Gavin Tucker completed 5 of 13 takedown attempts. And then in the third fight, which was Choi's first win against, this one was against Mokhtarian, 0 of 1 on the takedown attempts. And then Yusuf Zalal was 3 of 9 on takedown attempts. And then he also reversed Choi once, and so did Gavin Tucker. So we notice here that in these two fights here, 5 takedowns out of 13 attempts and 16 attempts, those were the 2 losses for Choi. So when his opponents attempt 12 or less takedowns, Seung-Woo Choi is actually undefeated. But the fights that he lost, we saw 13 takedown attempts and 16 takedown attempts. But as he's improving, because he's getting older and his mixed martial arts game is becoming more well-rounded, we see that Yusuf Zalal took him down 3 times out of 9 attempts. However, in those 3 takedowns, we see only 269 seconds of control time, and a lot of that was on the fence. So we see he's getting controlled a little bit less time per takedown now than he was against Evloev and against Tucker. So we're seeing some improvement here in terms of Choi. And if we look at the control time numbers for Erosa here in his fights, we see 73 seconds out of 764, 33 seconds out of 709, 17 seconds out of 900, 64 out of 334, and then it wasn't until the debut against Marcin Roszek back in 2015 that we actually saw him with more than 100 seconds of control time. This is very important. 60% of Choi's fights in the past have been taking place on the cage or with somebody's back on the mat. We can see with Julian Erosa's control time numbers here, and we can see also with the takedown attempts in his fights, 3 takedown attempts, 1, 0, 0, 0, then 6 against Sean Woodson, and then 0 against Nate Landwehr. He knocked him out. So we see an opportunity for Choi to do a lot more striking in this fight than he has in the past. And we would have to go back to the Suman Mokhtarian fight to see Seung-Woo Choi, how he looks when he's just in the center of the cage striking. He gets that advantage. He has the long, straight punches as compared to Erosa, who throws a lot of hooks, okay? Choi's punches are going to get there first. If we look at the power numbers, especially power numbers against, we can see over here, these are the knockdown numbers. I'm sorry. We're scrolling a little too fast here. These are the knockdown numbers against for Julian Erosa. 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0. My God, 5 out of 8 fights he's been knocked down. That's a lot. And if Choi knocks you down, he is going to finish. Because if you watch Seung-Woo Choi's pre-UFC tape when he was finishing fighters in Asia, man, when that guy gets somebody hurt, he absolutely empties the tank. And we can even see it in the Mokhtarian fight. When he hurt Mokhtarian in the second round, I believe that Choi might have thrown a 40-punch combination, and I am not exaggerating. 40-punch combination when he had Mokhtarian hurt. I don't know how Mokhtarian got through that fire, but he managed to get through it. But Seung-Woo Choi has a killer instinct. He's going to spend a lot more of his time on his feet. I think he's going to be a lot more comfortable in this fight, and I think that Erosa's hooks aren't going to get there as quickly as Seung-Woo Choi's straight punches. Also, something to remember is that Erosa is a pressure fighter, which is something you really see too often out of tall fighters that want to maintain distance. But he's a pressure fighter. That's not going to bother Choi. Choi doesn't need to use his length because his first striking art is Muay Thai. And we know that those knees land up close. Those elbows land up close. So I don't really see a lot of advantages here if we look at the technical aspects of the striking, because Erosa isn't really longer than Choi. Erosa gets knocked down a ton, and Choi has never been knocked down in the UFC. Erosa's been knocked out a lot, and Choi throws with a lot of power. Neither one of these guys is spectacular defensively. So I do see a lot of things really lining up well here for Choi in terms of the striking numbers and in terms of the technical aspects. Erosa could go to his grappling, but we've only seen 11 takedown attempts out of him in 8 fights. And like we said, I mean, in Julian Erosa's 8 fights, he's attempted 11 takedowns. Well, what did we say about Choi here? That, I mean, he saw more takedown attempts in his first fight against Movsar Evloev, who had 16 takedown attempts against him in 1 fight. Tucker had 13 takedown attempts against him in 1 fight. And those are the fights that we saw him lose because he was out controlled. Well, Julian Erosa hasn't had 13 or 16 takedown attempts in his entire fucking career. So I don't really see him controlling Choi on the ground, which has been the path to victory that we've seen people get over Choi in the UFC. Let's look at the strength of schedule matchups here and get an idea for what kind of competition these guys have been fighting. Julian Erosa with a 1.8 ratio, 3.5 total fights, while Choi's ratio is 3, and that's because he's fighting guys like Gavin Tucker and Evloev who have really good records. But only 3 total fights, so neither one of these guys is fighting incredibly experienced competition, but Seung-Woo, Choi overall fighting the fighters with the better ratios. In terms of the wins, Erosa's got better wins in terms of the ratio. Seung-Woo Choi's got better wins in terms of fighting the more experienced fighters, but neither one of these guys is beating experienced fighters, as they have 1.75 total fights on Erosa's wins and only 2.5 on Choi's. If we look at the ratio on the losses, Choi's loss is obviously more impressive with a 6 ratio. That's ridiculous. 3.5 total fights, while it's slightly more experienced competition for Erosa at 5.25 total fights and a 1.63 ratio. So, I mean, I would give the slight strength of schedule advantage here to Choi. However, Erosa's got more experience. Erosa's got, 8 fights compared to Choi's. So, the experience does mean something there. And then we see in the last 5 we see Choi is 3-2 in his last 5. 4 of those fights being in the UFC. His rematch against Jae-Woon Kim, which I have highlighted here, he actually lost to Jae-Woon Kim 2 fights prior to this fight and then knocked him out in the second round. While he's lost to Evloev, Tucker, and he's got wins over Zalal and Mokhtarian. And we see Erosa on a 2-fight win streak here with wins against Landwehr and a great come-from-behind win against Woodson. And then losses against Arce, a unanimous decision against Grant Dawson, and then he's been knocked out by Devontae Smith. No shame in that. Devontae Smith is a stud, and he's got crazy fast hands and a ton of power. Yeah, that's what we got here for this fight. I am leaning Choi. The line, let's have a look at the line here. All right, and we've got, let's see if we can scroll down. Julian Erosa is plus 120 and Seung-Woo Choi minus 152. I don't know if I'd lay that kind of juice on Choi. I think he wins this fight, but laying minus 152 over a game opponent like Erosa might be a little too wide for me. If we see Seung-Woo Choi plus 200 to win by decision, plus 280 for Erosa to win by decision. Got some fat props here. Seung-Woo Choi by submission plus 1200. Please don't bet it. Choi by KO plus 340. He could knock out. There might be some value there. Maybe if you're on the Choi side, instead of laying minus 152, maybe what you say is, okay, Erosa's been knocked out in 3 out of his 4 UFC losses, and Choi's going to finally get a chance to stand in the middle of the cage and use that Muay Thai of his without having to worry about getting wrestle fucked for a full 15 minutes, maybe instead of laying that minus 152, if you do like Choi, maybe you bet against the chinniness of Erosa. You say he's going to land one of those big shots and finish him. Plus 340 would probably be the way that I would go if I was looking to play Choi. If I'm looking at Erosa by points here, because I've never seen Choi finished in the UFC, Tucker did finish him late in the fight, but Evloev couldn't finish him. If you see Erosa winning this fight, plus 280 by points, but you're getting already plus 120 just on the money line. I don't know if that's juicy enough for Juicy J. I did not mean to do that, but that worked out nice. And we got, let's see, will the fight go the distance? Yes, minus 130. So the bookies are thinking this one goes the full distance, and that's fine. I don't tend to disagree with them on that. I think Choi's got more of a chance to finish this thing inside the distance, but maybe if you think that there's a submission path of victory for Julian Erosa, as he did get that pretty sweet Darce choke submission against Sean Woodson. Choi's been submitted before. Julian Erosa by submission plus 600. There's some meat on that bone. But yeah, I'm picking Choi. I might throw a tiny bit down on that knockout prop. It seems all right to me. But I hope you guys found this breakdown helpful. Hopefully it helped you make a decision on if you were on one of the sides here. Check me out if you want to know what I'm doing outside of the Balls Deep breakdowns that we do here on my channel. You can check me out on Pub Sports Radio on Sunday nights, 6:15 Central Time, 7:15 Eastern. We do a show called Stat Diggers, myself and DFS by the Numbers, where we get into an early look for the following Saturday's card. We go through every fight. We've got the matchup template here for all of the 13 fights that were supposed to happen. Now we're down to 12. And we go through it fight by fight. Check that out on Pub Sports Radio, and I do a main event breakdown video with my man DFS by the Numbers. We do that we release that one on early Monday morning, and we go balls deep into the main event. You can check the main event of this card, the Korean Zombie versus Ige. We got that breakdown on DFS by the Numbers channel on Monday morning. Check that video out. And then you can check me out here on the Uncle Weezy YouTube channel doing my balls deep breakdowns. I hope you guys found this helpful. If you did, please leave a like. Please subscribe. If you have any constructive criticism for me, leave it in the comments below. Thank you for watching. God bless all of you, and I will check you next time.